I said, hey, what about 10 grand more than that price? Do you think you could do that? I was just trying my luck, really. 24 hours later, he came back and he said, Sean, I've got you 10 grand more than what you asked for yesterday. Are we ready to rumble? Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PropSpotter. PropSpotter, the smarter way home. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about a journey I have had myself while property investing. So, if we take ourselves back 10, 12 years, one of the first properties I ever bought was a detached house on a small block of land in Mildura. This house was less than 300 square meters on a good street in Mildura, in a good part of Mildura, or so I was told, right? The house was newly built at the time. It was less than 3 years old. It smelled great. It looked shiny. The bench top was shining from wall to wall. There was smell of fresh paint inside the house, and it'd been well looked after in the 1 or 2 years that it'd been around. At that time, I purchased the house for $285,000, and the rental yield on the property was 6.2%. What drew me mainly to Mildura was the vacancy rate at the time, which in 2016 was sub 1%. Remember, I'm a young kid, couple of $1,000s in the bank account, eager to buy my first property. I'd done a little bit of research, but I definitely did not know what I know today. And so I was just on my journey, right? Over my property investing journey and over the last 10 to 12 years, I've started to understand that, when buying property, land is quite key to your capital growth. And this showed. Of all the properties that I've owned or had the pleasure of owning in my lifetime, this one in Mildura had the least amount of land. In the last year, though, with the rise of buyer's agents and Mildura becoming a little bit of a regional hotspot, I started to get phone calls from agents all over Mildura, day in, day out, or let's say week in, week out. Maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit. These agents would call me and they'd say, Sean, I'd love to sell your property. Have you thought about selling? Sean, please sell. We've got many opportunities to sell. The market's running hot at the moment. Would you like to sell? The stories go on. At first, Mildura was part of a long-term strategy and part of the eventual strategy, given the yield that I was earning on that property and also the fact that rents have gone up. However, an opportunity came up recently to rebalance the portfolio, sell down Mildura, and replace it with a more quality dual occupancy asset in a capital city with more than 900 square meters of land, right? So the ball was in my court. Either do nothing, keep Mildura, or actually sell down Mildura, use the money from Mildura and put it into this new opportunity. An agent I'd worked with in the past mentioned that he could close the sale in 7 days off market without me paying any advertising cost and prior to me having signed anything. So I said, okay, let's go ahead. Let's do it. I didn't hear anything for a couple of days. And 3 or 4 days later, he called back and he said, Sean, we can get you a price over $500,000 for that property. That's a 75% growth. I said, hey, what about 10 grand more than that price? Do you think you could do that? I was just trying my luck, really. 24 hours later, he came back and he said, Sean, I've got you 10 grand more than what you asked for yesterday. Are we ready to rumble? At that point, I really had no choice. We're talking 80% up from my initial purchase price, a very small block of land, and the opportunity to get into a more quality and higher yielding asset. So I said, let's do it. He recorded a video of the house and he sent it across to this contact. From a seller's perspective, it was the easiest sale I'd ever done. Now, through the process, I found out that this house was being purchased on behalf of a buyer's agent for that client. Now, that got me thinking, is the house really suitable for a buyer's agent's client? Initially, I didn't think so, but I also acknowledge that I have zero knowledge on the client's situation, so I can't comment on that. Things like the client's expectations on price, the client's yield, the deposit they've got, what they're actually looking for in a property, new, old. However, if I was using a buyer's agent and this property was recommended to me, I personally wouldn't be happy for the following reasons. Number one, land size. We're talking less than 300 square meters in a regional town. Holding that when the median land size in town is 600 square meters or more, that gives me a few red flags. Proximity to the CBD is nice, but when people can throw a stone a little further away and get something a little more bigger, how amazing. Number two, new build. Now, there's nothing wrong with newer property, right? In fact, there's more depreciation and possibly less issues, but it gets reflected in the price. The house that I've got is now 13 years old, so it's neither new, neither old. It's definitely more on the newer side when you look at Mildura's housing stock, but it's new, right? And so you've got to pay more as an investor for new property. Yield. The third reason is yield. This property at its selling price excluding stamp duty, is going to yield 4.8% from January, right? So the current rent right now, it's probably rent yielding about 4.4%, but I negotiated a rent increase, a massive rent increase to take effect from January for 12 months, which would see it yielding 4.8%. Now, while that is a respectable yield in today's market, there are greater capital growth opportunities in cities like Melbourne, where you sacrifice a little bit on yield and you get 4% or 4.2%, or opportunities in Hobart that could get you 5% plus. That's the third reason I probably wouldn't be looking at buying a property like. And number four, and possibly the most important one for me, is that lack of development opportunity. Given the land size of less than 300 square meters, your options are limited. And in my ex property, practically non-existent. What are you going to build? Where are you going to incrementally add value from? This is a large proponent to driving price. The asset I'm replacing it with has a house, a granny flat, and a large enough backyard for you to add a third dwelling. Now, when you look at it that way, right, opportunities and upside is essentially what you're buying in property, and the more of it you can have, the better. Now, that's on the property itself. Now, the buyer's agent process, that's another bit of it I found relatively interesting. I noticed through the process that the conveyancer had the same office address as the buyer's agent. I also noticed that the fees that were on the settlement sheet were a lot higher than the fees I'd normally pay for conveyancing. I noticed that the client was buying in a trust, a 4.8% yielding asset. Now, I don't necessarily know how much they were borrowing or not borrowing, so again, can't comment on that. But these were all things that stood out to me as, that's interesting. And is that really the best for that particular client? I've got no clue, right? Now, if you are new to your journey and want some free insights on what you should be looking out for, and maybe you've spoken to a couple of buyer's agents, or maybe you haven't, let's have a chat and talk about the PropSpotter process. I'm always happy to share knowledge. So feel free to jump on our website and book a call at propspotter.com.au. Now for me, it's on to the next property. I'll chat to you soon.